I remember the day Laura first suggested getting a part-time job. We were sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of unpaid bills in front of us. My contracting business had taken a hit over the last year. Projects that were once steady had slowed to a trickle, and the work that came in barely kept us afloat. We had 2 kids to take care of, a mortgage, and no real savings left to cushion the blows. The pressure was relentless. "We can't keep going like this," Laura said, her voice steady but tired. "I've been thinking maybe I could get a job, just part-time. It'll help us get back on our feet." At first, I wasn't sure. Laura hadn't worked since we had our second child, and the thought of her juggling work on top of taking care of the kids worried me. But what choice did we have? I couldn't handle it all on my own, and she was willing. So, I agreed, though a part of me felt like I was failing as a provider. A few days later, she landed a job as a waitress at a bar nearby. It didn't seem like much, but the tips were supposed to be decent, and she would only work a few nights a week. It felt like a small win, a temporary fix, until I could get more contracts. At first, everything seemed normal. She'd come home late, exhausted but content. We'd sit in the living room, sipping tea as she told me stories about her quirky coworkers and rowdy customers. She laughed about how chaotic it got during happy hour and how generous some customers could be with their tips. I felt relieved. It was tough, but it felt like we were in this together, fighting to make ends meet. But then things started to change. The first sign was subtle. Laura started coming home later and later. She'd brush it off, saying the bar had been busy, or that she stayed behind to help close up. It made sense, bars can run late, but the excuses started piling up. She'd be out for hours, and when I asked what time she finished, her answers were vague. One night, I stayed up to wait for her. When she finally walked through the door, it was well past 2 a.m. Her clothes smelled like the bar's stale beer and cigarette smoke, but there was something else. She seemed distant, like she wasn't fully present. I asked how her shift went, and she just muttered, "Busy," before heading straight to the shower. No stories, no laughs, just silence. The unease gnawed at me. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but something felt wrong. The next day, I tried to push the thoughts aside, convincing myself it was all in my head. After all, the money she was bringing in was helping us. We were catching up on bills, and for the first time in months, the stress seemed to be lifting. But then came the second sign, the money. It didn't make sense. For a part-time waitress, Laura was bringing in a lot of cash. More than I expected, more than she had ever mentioned. At first, I didn't think too much of it. I was just relieved we could breathe a little easier. We even managed to upgrade the car, a move that seemed impossible just a few months ago. Laura brushed it off as being lucky with tips, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Then came the new clothes. She started buying expensive outfits, designer handbags, things we couldn't normally afford. I asked where the money was coming from, and she just smiled, saying she'd been smart with her spending. But I knew better. We were still on the edge, and even with her job, we couldn't afford this kind of lifestyle. That's when my suspicions began to grow. I tried to ignore it at first. I didn't want to believe that something could be wrong. Laura and I had been through so much together. We had always been a team. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her job than she was letting on. One night, while she was out, I started doing some math. Based on what she said she was making, it didn't add up. Not even close. The tips would have to be astronomical for her to be making this much money. And then there were the nights she'd come home even later than usual, always with a new excuse. I thought about asking her directly, but every time I tried to bring it up, she'd skillfully dodge the question. She'd laugh, kiss me on the cheek, and say something like, "You worry too much," before changing the subject. It was infuriating, but I couldn't press her without sounding suspicious. Then came the night that changed everything. I was on my way home from a job when I passed by the bar where Laura worked. It was late, around midnight, and I thought I'd drop by, maybe surprise her and see if she wanted a ride home. But as I drove past, I noticed something strange. Her car wasn't in the parking lot. Confused, I drove around the block, thinking maybe she had parked somewhere else. But no, her car was nowhere in sight. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the feeling of dread in my stomach wouldn't go away. I waited for her to come home that night, asking casually how her shift went. "Busy, as usual," she said, avoiding eye contact. When I asked if she needed a ride home next time, she gave me a strange look, almost like she knew what I was asking without me saying it. "No need," she said quickly. "I usually grab a ride with one of the other girls. It's easier that way." The alarm bells in my head were deafening by this point, but I still couldn't bring myself to accuse her of anything. Not without proof. But one thing was clear. Laura was hiding something, and whatever it wasn't good. And that was the night I decided to start digging for the truth. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and doubt. Every time Laura left for work, I found myself watching the clock, wondering what she was really up to. I tried to keep my suspicions hidden, but inside, I was battling an avalanche of emotions: fear, anger, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal that I couldn't yet prove. It was late one evening when I decided to do something I had never done before: look through her phone. She had left it charging in the kitchen while she took a shower, so I seized the opportunity. My heart was pounding as I unlocked the screen, half hoping I wouldn't find anything, half expecting my worst fears to be confirmed. At first, everything seemed normal. A few texts with friends, some group chats. But then I noticed a string of messages from an unknown number. The conversations were vague, but something about them felt off. The messages were filled with short exchanges: "Are you free later?" and "same time," without any real details. Nothing incriminating, but my gut told me these weren't just friendly conversations. Laura had never mentioned anyone new in her life. No new friends from the bar or elsewhere, and the tone of these messages was different. There was a familiarity to them, a casualness that I couldn't shake. Still, I didn't have anything concrete, so I put the phone back where I found it, feeling no closer to the truth but more suspicious than ever. The next morning, I decided to follow her. She left around 5:30, saying she had an early shift at the bar. I waited a few minutes after she left, then grabbed my keys and followed. Keeping a safe distance, I watched her drive through town, but instead of heading to the bar, she took a turn onto the highway. I stayed behind, trying to remain inconspicuous, my pulse quickening with every mile. After about 20 minutes, she pulled into the parking lot of a hotel, an upscale one. Not the kind of place I'd ever imagine her going for any legitimate reason. She parked, got out of the car, and walked inside without even glancing around. I sat there in my truck, staring at the entrance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. What was she doing? Who was she meeting? The answer seemed obvious, but I didn't want to believe it. Not yet. I waited for over an hour, the minutes dragging on like hours. Finally, Laura came out of the hotel, casually walking back to her car as if nothing unusual had happened. She wasn't carrying anything, no sign of a work-related errand, just a calm, composed demeanor that only deepened the knot in my stomach. I followed her back to town, watching as she drove straight to the bar and parked in the lot. She went inside, and I stayed in my truck, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront her now? Should I wait until I had more proof? Every instinct in me wanted to storm into that bar and demand answers, but I knew that would only lead to denial and more lies. Instead, I decided to bide my time. I needed more than just suspicions. I needed undeniable proof. That night, when Laura came home, she was her usual self: cheerful, tired, and completely at ease. I asked her about her shift, and she rattled off a story about a rowdy group of customers who had left a big tip. I listened, nodding along, but all I could think about was the hotel. I didn't mention it. I couldn't, not yet. Over the next few days, I became more vigilant. I checked her phone again whenever I had the chance, but she had started deleting her messages. That only confirmed my suspicions. Something was going on, and she was covering her tracks. I also began paying more attention to her behavior. Laura had always been good at hiding her emotions, but now I could see the cracks in her facade. She was more guarded, more careful with her words. She didn't share as much about her day anymore, and when she did, the stories felt rehearsed, as if she had practiced them in her head before telling me. The nights she came home late became more frequent, and the excuses grew thinner. We were short-staffed, she'd say, or I had to cover an extra shift, but I had already driven by the bar on several of those nights, and her car wasn't there. The puzzle pieces were starting to come together, but I still didn't have the final image. I needed to catch her in the act, to have undeniable proof of what she was doing. But every time I got close, she slipped through my fingers. Then came the breakthrough. One night, while Laura was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from the same unknown number. Tomorrow night? Same place. My heart raced as I read it. This was my chance. Whoever this person was, they were planning to meet her again. I quickly jotted down the details before Laura came out of the bathroom. The next day, I made my plan. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. I needed to follow her again, to see exactly what she was doing and who she was meeting. That evening, when she left for work, I was right behind her, keeping my distance as she drove out of town once again. Just as before, she headed to the hotel, parking in the same spot and walking inside without a second glance. This time, I didn't just sit and wait. I got out of the truck and followed her in, staying far enough behind that she wouldn't notice me. The hotel lobby was quiet, and I watched from a corner as she approached the elevator. My heart pounded in my chest as I saw her press the button for the top floor. I hesitated, unsure of what to do next, but then I made my decision. I followed her up. When the elevator doors opened, I stayed back, watching as she walked down the hallway toward a room at the end. She knocked softly, and the door opened. I couldn't see who answered, but the way she walked inside without hesitation told me everything I needed to know. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing with questions and emotions. Part of me wanted to kick down that door and confront her right then and there, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. I needed to be smart about this. I needed more than just suspicions, I needed solid proof. So I turned and left, my stomach in knots, but my resolve stronger than ever. I was going to get to the bottom of this, and when I did, there would be no more hiding. I couldn't shake the image of Laura walking into that hotel room. Every detail was burned into my mind. The way she knocked, how she slipped inside without hesitation, the silence that followed. I felt like I was unraveling, questioning everything I thought I knew about her and us. But despite my anger and frustration, I still didn't have the hard evidence I needed. I couldn't confront her with vague accusations and suspicions. She was too good at deflecting, at weaving stories that would make me second-guess myself. I needed a new plan. That's when the idea came to me. I'd use a trick of my own. I decided to test her by pretending to be one of her clients. If she was really meeting someone for money, as I suspected, then it wouldn't be too hard to lure her into agreeing to meet me. And if she did, I'd finally have the proof I needed. I borrowed a burner phone from a friend, someone who didn't know much about what was going on but trusted me enough not to ask questions. Using the phone, I sent her a message, keeping it vague but clear enough that she'd understand what I was asking. I offered a large sum of money for a private meeting, suggesting we meet at a hotel later that night. I waited for her reply, my heart pounding as I stared at the screen. What if she didn't respond? What if she saw through the whole thing? Or worse, what if she agreed without hesitation? Minutes passed, and then the phone buzzed. I looked down and saw her reply, "Can't tonight. Already have plans. Maybe another time?" I exhaled, a strange mix of relief and disappointment swirling inside me. So, she wasn't available tonight, but that didn't mean she wasn't involved in something shady. She had just confirmed what I feared. She had plans, and those plans didn't include coming home after work. Frustrated but determined, I decided to keep pushing. I didn't reply right away, waiting a few hours before sending another message. I offered even more money and asked her to meet the following night instead. But before I could hear back, something unexpected happened. The next evening, just as I was gearing up for what I thought would be a confrontation, Laura came home earlier than usual. She seemed calm, even happy, and for a moment, I wondered if I had misread everything. Maybe she wasn't hiding anything after all. But then I noticed something strange. She had changed her routine. Instead of the usual shift at the bar, she said she was heading out to a private event, something she hadn't mentioned before. She claimed it was for a VIP client who tipped big. The way she casually mentioned it, like it was no big deal, made my blood boil. She didn't even realize how transparent her lie was. I waited until she left and, feeling desperate, I followed her again. This time, however, things took a different turn. She didn't go to the hotel where I had tried to lure her. Instead, She headed to a much more exclusive part of town, the kind of neighborhood where homes had private gates and sprawling driveways. I stayed back, watching from a distance as she pulled up to one of those massive estates. She parked, got out of the car, and walked toward the front door, which opened for her before she even had a chance to knock. A man stood there, someone I didn't recognize, but he looked well off, maybe in his 50s, dressed in a tailored suit. I watched as he greeted her with a smile, and she stepped inside without a moment's hesitation. That was all I needed. The hotel was one thing, but this was something else entirely. Laura was living a double life, and she thought I was too blind to see it. But I still couldn't confront her. I needed to know more. I needed to catch her in the act, not just with her words, but with undeniable evidence. The next day, I messaged her again from the burner phone, increasing the offer to an even higher amount. But her reply came back the same. Sorry, already booked? That was at confirmation. She wasn't just seeing one person. There were multiple clients, and she was making more money than I ever could have imagined. No wonder our finances had suddenly improved. No wonder we could afford the new car, the extra luxuries. But that night, things took another twist. Instead of meeting me, as I had tried to arrange, Laura sent someone else. I had been waiting outside the hotel, expecting her to show up, but instead, another woman arrived, someone I didn't know. At first, I was confused, but then it hit me. Laura was so deep in this world that she had a network. She wasn't just doing this for herself. She was connected to something bigger. My mind raced as I realized the depths of her deception. I had been too slow to catch her red-handed this time, but it wouldn't happen again. Every time she came home, she skillfully avoided the truth, weaving stories that didn't quite add up. But I was done being played. I was done being the fool. It was only a matter of time before I uncovered everything, and when I did, there'd be no more games. Things changed after that night. It wasn't just my suspicions that were growing, it was everything around us. Laura became more distant, more evasive, and yet somehow more confident. Our lives had always been centered around our struggles to make ends meet. But now that money seemed to be flowing in, there was a shift. And while I knew where it was coming from, I still hadn't confronted her directly. She started bringing home more expensive things, clothes, jewelry, even some high-end kitchen gadgets that I knew we didn't need. We were eating out more often, going to places that we wouldn't have even thought about before. Every time she pulled out a credit card or handed me cash, it felt like a slap in the face. I knew that money wasn't coming from tips. Our kids didn't notice, of course. To them, everything seemed great. We had more, and we were living better than we had in a long time. They didn't ask where the money was coming from, and I didn't explain. It wasn't their fault, and I didn't want to drag them into the mess I was starting to uncover. But every time Laura avoided my questions, every time she gave me a vague explanation for why she was coming home late or why she had to go out on a last-minute errand, my frustration grew. The lies were so obvious, and yet she acted like everything was perfectly normal, like I couldn't possibly be suspicious. One night, after she came home particularly late, I decided to push her a little harder. You've been working a lot of extra shifts lately, I said, trying to sound casual as we sat on the couch after dinner. Are they paying you overtime now? She barely looked up from her phone, giving me a quick smile. Yeah, things have been busy at the bar. They need all the help they can get. That's great, I replied, even though I knew it was a lie. But you've been coming home pretty late. Seems like you're working more hours than before. She shrugged, finally setting her phone down and turning to face me. You know how it is. It's just temporary. Once things settle down, I'll be home more. The way she said it, so smooth and convincing, almost made me doubt my own suspicions. Almost. But I wasn't buying it anymore. What about that hotel I saw you at the other night? I asked, my voice steady, but my heart racing. You didn't mention that. Was that for work too? Her eyes flickered with something surprise. Maybe, but she recovered quickly. What hotel? I drove by the other night. Thought I'd surprise you at the bar, but you weren't there. I saw your car at the hotel. There it was, the crack in her armor. For a moment, she looked panicked, but it was gone in an instant. She let out a short laugh, brushing her hair behind her ear. Oh, that. Yeah, we had a private party there. Some clients from the bar wanted a more private setting, so we rented a room. It was nothing, really. I stared at her, searching her face for any sign of truth. But it was a polished lie, just like all the others. I wanted to scream, to confront her right then and there, but I held back. I needed more. This wasn't enough. She was too good at wriggling out of tough conversations, and I wasn't about to let her slip away with another excuse. Instead, I nodded, pretending to accept her answer. Makes sense, I guess. Just seemed a little strange, that's all. She smiled again, visibly relieved that I wasn't pushing further. It's all fine, really. Just helping out where I can. But the truth was, I wasn't the only one under pressure anymore. As the days went on, I could see the cracks starting to show in Laura's facade. She had always been calm, collected, but now there were moments when she seemed distracted. She'd stare off into the distance during dinner or lose track of conversations. She was hiding something big, and the weight of it was starting to get to her. Meanwhile, things at work for me weren't getting any better. Contracts were drying up, and I found myself with more downtime than I could handle. Laura's newfound financial success only highlighted my failures. Every time she told me not to worry, that I'd get back on my feet, it felt like another reminder that she was carrying the load now and doing it in a way I couldn't understand or accept. Her words of encouragement felt hollow. "You'll figure it out," she'd say. "Things will turn around soon." But they didn't. Every week, I found myself with fewer jobs and more time to sit around, obsessing over what Laura was really up to. Even when we spent time together as a family, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally broken between us. We'd go out to dinner, the kids laughing and talking like everything was normal, but there was always this unspoken tension between me and Laura. She'd smile, act affectionate, but it felt rehearsed, like she was just playing a part. I tried to be patient, to keep gathering evidence, but it was getting harder. I could see her slipping away, living a life I wasn't part of, and it was killing me. The money, the late nights, the lies, it was all building up, and I knew it was only a matter of time before something gave. Every time I looked at her, I saw the woman I had married, the mother of my children, but behind that, I saw the stranger she had become, someone I barely recognized, someone who was keeping secrets and playing me for a fool. I wasn't going to let it go on much longer. I knew I had to act soon. I just didn't know how much longer I could keep up the charade. The weight of Laura's lies had become unbearable. Each night she came home, I found myself looking for clues, small slips in her carefully crafted facade. I was tired of waiting for the truth to reveal itself. I needed to take control. The little things were adding up, the late nights, the vague answers, the extra cash. I knew she was hiding something, and I was getting closer to figuring it out. Then came the breakthrough. It was a Tuesday evening, and Laura had left for what she called another shift. By this point, I had stopped believing her stories altogether, but this night was different. I decided to take a more direct approach. After she left, I searched through her things, more desperate than ever to find something concrete. Her purse, her dresser drawers, the kitchen cupboards. I had gone through them all before without finding much. But this time, I stumbled upon something I hadn't seen before. A receipt tucked into a book she kept in her nightstand. It was from a hotel, dated just a few days prior. I stared at the slip of paper, the hotel's logo embossed on top, the date and time standing out like a neon sign. She had told me she was working at the bar that night, but here it was, clear evidence that she had been elsewhere. The hotel wasn't the same one I had followed her to before. This was different, somewhere more exclusive, a place meant for clients who had more money than they knew what to do with. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the receipt, my heart pounding in my chest. I had found it, the proof I needed. She wasn't just lying about where she was living a life completely separate from the one we shared. I felt sick. All the late nights, the extra shifts, the mysterious trips, all of it started to fall into place. She wasn't just working at the bar. She wasn't just meeting VIP clients. Laura was involved in something far more dangerous, something that threatened to tear our family apart. I pocketed the receipt and took a deep breath. I wasn't going to confront her just yet. Not until I had everything laid out. I needed more, something that would make it impossible for her to talk her way out of it. That night, when Laura came home, I acted normal. It wasn't easy, but I managed to keep my suspicions hidden. I asked her how work was, and she gave me the same tired answer. Busy, but good. Just glad to be home. It took everything in me not to throw the receipt in her face right then and there. But I held back. I needed to bide my time. There was still one piece of the puzzle missing: the person she was meeting. I needed to know who was behind the other side of that hotel room door. The next morning, I made a plan. I took the day off from work, telling Laura I had some errands to run. She didn't ask questions, which suited me just fine. After she left, I drove to the hotel listed on the receipt. It was one of those places that catered to wealthy businessmen and high-end clients, the kind of place I wouldn't normally set foot in. But today, I wasn't here to play by the rules. I parked across the street, keeping a low profile as I watched the comings and goings at the hotel. I had no idea what I was looking for, but I figured if I stayed long enough, I'd see something or someone that would give me a clue. Hours passed. I watched as people entered and exited the hotel: couples, businessmen, tourists. None of them seemed connected to Laura. I was about to give up when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. The man from the upscale house. The one who had greeted Laura with that smug smile just days before. He was standing by the entrance, talking to a woman in a sharp suit. They exchanged a few words before he disappeared inside, his face etched with the same cold confidence I had seen before. It was him. He was the one she was meeting. I waited until he was out of sight before I made my move. I walked into the hotel lobby, pretending to be just another guest. The receptionist barely looked up as I made my way to the elevators, my pulse racing. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I had to act fast. I wasn't leaving this place without answers. I pressed the button for the top floor, the same floor I had seen Laura go to before. The elevator ride felt like an eternity, the air thick with tension. When the doors opened, I stepped out cautiously, my eyes scanning the hallway. It was eerily quiet, just as it had been the last time. I walked down the corridor, my footsteps barely making a sound. Room 1507, the number on the receipt. I stopped outside the door, my heart hammering in my chest. What if she was inside? What if she wasn't? What if this was all a mistake? Taking a deep breath, I knocked. Silence. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I stood there, unsure of what to do next. Should I leave? Should I keep knocking? But just as I was about to turn away, the door creaked open, and there she was. Laura. She stood there, staring at me, her face a mixture of shock and confusion. For a moment, neither of us said anything. It was like time had stopped, the air between us thick with unspoken accusations. "What are you doing here?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I held up the receipt, my hand shaking. "I could ask you the same thing." Her eyes flicked to the piece of paper in my hand, then back to my face. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. "James, I can explain," she started, but I cut her off. "Explain what, Laura? That you've been lying to me? That you've been meeting God knows who?" Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She knew. She knew there was nothing she could say to make this go away. The truth was out, and there was no hiding from it anymore. The look on Laura's face was all the confirmation I needed. Her silence told me everything. There were no more lies she could spin, no more stories to cover up the truth. She had been caught, and we both knew it. But instead of feeling the satisfaction I had expected, I felt hollow, like everything I had been working toward had left me with nothing. "James, it's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling, but I didn't care to hear her excuses. "Not what I think." I snapped. "I've followed you. I've seen where you go, who you meet. Don't insult me by pretending there's some innocent explanation for this." She flinched, the reality of the situation sinking in. There was no escaping it now. I wanted to scream, to throw everything in her face, but I held back. I wasn't about to let her see how much this had destroyed me. No, I was going to handle this on my terms. For weeks, I had been the one in the dark, the one trying to piece together the puzzle of her betrayal. But now that I had the final clue, I realized something. I didn't need her anymore. I didn't need her lies, her deceit. I had spent too much time letting her control the narrative, but now it was my turn. As she stood there, struggling to find words, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her anymore. I wasn't going to beg for answers. Instead, I was going to do something that would hurt her the way she had hurt me. You know what, Laura? I said, my voice eerily calm. I don't even care anymore. Her eyes widened, taken aback by my sudden change in demeanor. What are you talking about? I stepped closer, the anger that had been building for weeks now simmering just beneath the surface. I'm done. I'm done with your lies, with trying to figure out where you are, who you're with. You've been living a double life, and frankly, I don't give a damn anymore. Her face twisted in confusion. James, please. No, don't James, please me, I interrupted, my voice sharp. You think you're the only one who's been playing games? You think I haven't been able to see what's going on? You're wrong, Laura. I've been onto you for a while now. And guess what? I've moved on, too. She blinked, her confusion turning to shock. What do you mean, you've moved on? I smirked, feeling the power shift between us. Let's just say, while you were busy sneaking around, I wasn't exactly sitting at home waiting for you. It wasn't true. At least, not at first. But as the words left my mouth, I realized that they could be. I had been hurt, betrayed, and angry for so long. I needed to do something to take back control, to even the score. And that's exactly what I planned to do. Laura stared at me, her face pale. You cheated on me? The irony of her accusation almost made me laugh. What? You're surprised? I asked, my voice cold. Why shouldn't I? You've been meeting men at hotels, lying to me, treating me like a fool. Did you really think I'd just sit back and take it? Her hands trembled as she took a step back, her eyes searching mine for any sign of the man she used to know. But that man was gone. She had destroyed him, piece by piece, with every lie, every deceitful smile. Who? She demanded, her voice shaky. Who did you? It doesn't matter who. I cut her off. What matters is that I've had enough. You don't get to control me anymore. I'm done playing your game, Laura. The truth was, I hadn't cheated yet. But the thought had been there, lurking in the back of my mind ever since I realized what she was doing. I hadn't crossed that line, but I was ready to now. If she could betray me without a second thought, then why should I stay loyal to her? A few nights before, I had met someone. A girl, younger, prettier, someone who didn't carry the weight of lies and betrayal on her shoulders. She wasn't Laura, and that was the best part. I hadn't gone through with it, but now I felt like I had a reason to. Revenge. Laura's mouth moved, but no words came out. She was finally speechless, finally out of excuses, and I relished it. For once, I was the one in control. I was the one who could walk away and leave her reeling. James, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please. I never meant for this to happen. I can explain. I shook my head, stepping back toward the door. I'm not interested in your explanations anymore. I'm done with you. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving her standing there in the hotel room. The truth finally laid bare between us. I didn't need to hear her excuses. I didn't need her lies. I had my own way of dealing with the pain now, and as I left that hotel, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I wasn't going to be the fool anymore. I was going to get even. Leaving Laura in that hotel room should have felt like victory, but instead, it left me with a strange emptiness. The satisfaction I thought I'd get from confronting her, from throwing her betrayal back in her face, was nowhere to be found. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that everything was slipping out of control. I had told her about my revenge, the girl I had met, and though I hadn't acted on it yet, I knew I would. I wasn't just trying to hurt Laura anymore, I was trying to find a way to numb the pain she had caused. That night, I couldn't go home. I couldn't face our kids, not with everything that had just happened. I found myself at a bar, sitting alone, nursing a drink while I replayed the last few months in my head. How had things fallen apart so quickly? How had Laura gone from the woman I loved to a stranger I could hardly recognize? I thought back to the night I met the other girl. Her name was Melanie. We'd bumped into each other at a friend's gathering a week before. She was younger, carefree, everything that Laura wasn't anymore. We talked, shared drinks, and for a brief moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, like I was seen, like I mattered. Nothing had happened between us then. At the time, I had still been holding on to the hope that Laura's secrets were a misunderstanding. But now, everything was different. Laura had cheated. She had betrayed me, and I wasn't going to sit back and let it eat me alive. I texted Melanie, asking if she was free to meet. As I waited for her response, I felt a twisted sense of anticipation. This was my chance to take something back, to regain control over my life. But deep down, I knew it wasn't going to fix anything. Revenge wouldn't heal the wounds Laura had left. It would only make me more like her. Melanie responded quickly. She was free. I told her to meet me at a hotel, the same one I had followed Laura to the night before. There was something poetic about that, something that made the whole situation feel like the perfect retaliation. But when I arrived at the hotel, something changed. I stood outside the entrance, staring at the revolving doors, and felt a wave of doubt wash over me. Was this really what I wanted? Would this make things better? Or would it just pull me deeper into the mess Laura had created? As I stood there, my phone buzzed. It was Melanie, texting that she was almost there. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, the pull of temptation battling against the part of me that still wanted to be the man I used to be, the man I had promised myself I wouldn't lose. I thought about Laura, about how she had lied, how she had hidden her secret life from me. I thought about the kids, about what it would mean for them if I went down this path, if I let revenge consume me. And then I thought about myself, about how, for months, I had let Laura's betrayal define me, turning me into someone I didn't even recognize. I couldn't do it. I texted Melanie back, telling her not to come, that something had come up. I turned and walked away from the hotel, feeling a strange mix of relief and regret. I wasn't going to let Laura's betrayal drag me down any further. I had already lost too much. But when I got home that night, I knew I couldn't keep going like this. The lies, the secrets, the distance between us, it was all too much. Laura was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up at me, a mixture of guilt and hope in her expression. "James, I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I never wanted things to end up like this." I stood there, staring at her, feeling the weight of everything we had lost. "Why?" I asked. It was the only word I could manage. "Why did you do it?" She wiped her eyes, shaking her head. "I don't know. I was scared. We were struggling, and I didn't know how to fix it. And then, it just spiraled. I'm so sorry." Her words felt hollow, like they couldn't possibly fill the void between us. "It's too late for that," I said, my voice flat. "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending like everything is going to be okay." Laura nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know. I've messed everything up." There was a long silence between us, the kind of silence that speaks louder than any words could. The truth was, our marriage had unraveled long before I had caught her in the hotel. This was just the final thread that had snapped. "I'm going to stay with my brother for a while," I finally said. "I need some space to think." She didn't argue, didn't try to stop me. I could see the defeat in her eyes. "I understand," she whispered. As I packed a bag that night, I realized that revenge wouldn't have fixed anything. Cheating on Laura would have only made me feel worse, and it wouldn't have erased the betrayal she had committed. Walking away was the only real choice I had left. When I left the house, I didn't know what the future held for us, whether we'd ever find a way to rebuild, or if this was the end of our marriage. But for the first time in months, I felt like I had taken control of my life again. It wasn't the revenge I had imagined, but it was enough.